You're right.
Yeah,
Having employee injuries.
I'll have a march here in the morning. Things for the dog.
We're now live streaming.
Yeah.
We're not recording yet. Gotta do it. Gotta do it.
You can start recording.
Right, good evening and welcome everyone to the November 8th, 2022 meeting of the Paloma City Council. City Recorder, could we have the roll call, please?
Jessica Andrade. Present. Catherine Bisco. Here. Ruth Causey.
Here.
Matt Lehman.
Here.
David Lowe. Oh. And Teresa Nielsen. Here.
All right, very good. Thank you very much. In Mayor Jones' absence, I'll be leading this evening's meeting. And our first order of business is the water reservoir contract award. I see that Mr. Fear is not here. Will you be leading the
He's
agenda?
on Zoom.
He's on
He
Zoom.
is on Zoom.
We've got him.
Oh, he's tiny on Zoom.
I guess I'm up.
You're up.
All righty. We're here tonight to have our design engineer from West Tech, Pete Blumenthal, is also joining us in case there's any other questions, but we're basically here. We got our quotes back from our bids for the reservoir portion of the project, and we're just here tonight to see if we can get that approved and the contractor approved and the contract so we can get started.
See, are there any questions for Mr. Fear and Mr. Blumenthal? Councilor Andrade.
Yeah, I was curious what the specifications are for the reservoir. I don't know if it's in one of the supplemental items that you sent today because I haven't gotten a chance to look at it, but looking at the figure, I don't see any numbers.
What kind of specifications were you looking for?
Like height and width or diameter, I guess, and like thickness of the walls. I guess thickness isn't as important, but
Sure. This is Pete Blumenthal from West Tech. I can field some of those. I wasn't aware that was what you needed. It's a 100-foot diameter reservoir, about 28 feet tall from the ground to the top lid, and the core wall thickness is 10 inches thick, and it's a pretty ordinary structure, circular.
and then you said 28 feet from the top lid, the top of the lid to the to underground as well, or is that to the
To the perimeter road around the reservoir. So there's a 10-foot, if you look on the figure that shows the photo there will be a 10-foot or a 12-foot wide sort of maintenance road that'll be paved around the full circumference of the tank. And so from that datum upward, 28 feet tall.
Thank you very much.
Yes.
Councillor Liston.
I'm just curious, Mr. Blumenthal, if you could tell us, I suspect that road will also have a height above the ground level at this time, just considering the condition of the soil and the water level?
Yes. Yes. So the existing grade of that park area there is below the 100-year floodplain. And the finished roadway around the reservoir, we're sort of building up the local grades so that you'll have a 1 foot minimum above the 100-year floodplain.
So do you have an estimation of how high that would be? So
Yes, I can give you a quick, it might be about 4 feet maybe above the nominal surface grade. And then for the, as you might imagine, the transition around from the outer edge of the perimeter road, we'll just have a 3-to-1 fill slope that'll transition back down to meet the existing grade.
thank you.
Councillor Nielsen, did you have a question?
Bid, if that's all right. Considering this bid, are we on track with our overall budget for the water treatment, the total project? Does this bid fit in so that we are looking to be on track with the water treatment budget?
Yes, we are. I mean, as we've all heard, you know, the economy has been a little unpredictable lately with prices. I think this is consistent with our overall budget. You know, we're pushing a little bit, reducing a little bit of the margin maybe that we thought we would have. But I think, you know, for the type of work that you're asking for, I would say that this is consistent with that overall goal.
Other questions? Councillor Nielsen.
The anti-graffiti coating, is that necessary and is it more reasonable to go on at this time in the construction rather than after the construction?
Sure, it could be either of the coatings, the two parts, the primer. The primer would be required if you want to apply the anti-graffiti coating. But to answer your question, those could be applied at any point or not at all. It's kind of it's difficult to advise exactly what your threat might be to graffiti. As a consultant, we often don't understand some of the local needs or threats. And as anyone can imagine, the graffiti artists, or whatever we choose to call them, can be persistent and can, you know, it doesn't take very long to paint something out. So I don't know what the right answer is. Honestly, I felt like I should defer that to you guys.
And is the cost the same whether we do it now or whether we do it in the upcoming, I mean, in the soon upcoming months?
So if I understand the question, the coating would be obviously applied at the very end of the project, once the reservoir is complete and the concrete has cured. The decision to award it could be made at any point within the contract. If that makes sense?
Yes, it is. And does that sealer need to be reapplied every so often, or is that a one-time done thing?
It's usually a one-time deal. It's you know, graffiti is, over time, the coating that you have will age differently depending on which side of the reservoir gets the most UV exposure. There isn't really a perfect solution for graffiti other than to not apply it. And that's wishful thinking. So I would say that it would have a probably 10-year reasonable life. And as the life extends, you're going to get slightly less protection, but you know, it's a good product. It's about one of the better ones you can get for for the use, the application.
Counselor Gordon.
So a question for Director Fear. How much, what is our experience with the graffiti in this town and the necessary steps to take care of that?
We have varying degrees of graffiti around town. The existing reservoir has been tagged several times. We've had, just in the recent past, within the last couple months, we've had a lot of street signs that have been tagged with paint, especially around the school. We have other vandalism in that park, both parks, besides vandalism or besides graffiti, but we do get graffiti on occasion.
So could I ask you what your estimate would be to clean up graffiti, say over the period of a year, how much it costs the city to take care of graffiti related incidents?
$500, $600.
Okay. Not too much.
Counselor Andrade, did you have a question?
Yes, thank you. So I did a quick skim just now of the bid items since I didn't have time to look at it earlier today. And when looking at those, could you please confirm which of the bid items directly go towards labor? Because if I'm looking at this correctly, it almost looks like labor is perhaps being paid less by HP Civil. And I'd like to know if that's also what your takeaway is.
Okay, so labor is, each line item is a combination of materials and labor. So labor and materials are spread out pretty uniformly across those 9 items, or 11 if you include the 2 additive alternatives. We haven't broken out and itemized labor as a separate element.
Okay, so then when in your look at these bids, what is the difference then between them? Is it mostly the cost of labor, or would it be something else?
The difference is between, let's say if you picked a particular line item, and then you compare it between the 3 contractors. There's probably, 1,500 easily cost components that a contractor is going to assemble for this project. And I've identified 9 that are sort of general categories of work. And so each contractor makes their best judgment as to, which of this large sum of work elements best fits into which line item. So it's not a hard and fast comparison to do line by line, just because everybody's judgment will be slightly different as to, which of the large project-wide elements fits under which category that I had identified. So, but I think the numbers that are worth looking at are for sure the base bid total that you see as a subtotal for items 1 through 9. You can compare those 3 subtotals.
Pete?
Yes.
You might explain how some contractors front load their contracts on,
Oh, sure.
With the MOBIN and some of the other items, and how everybody kind of categorizes them different.
Yeah, so obviously the contractors are going to be developing a cash flow diagram, trying to, if they had their choice, burden the payments up front so they get more of their money up front versus at the tail end. So what you've seen, I think, between the 2, the second and third bidders is a preference for pushing some of the money up front. HB Civil has a low mobilization and demobilization cost. I don't believe that's a cause for concern at all. I think that's just them being a little more true to form. I mean, there isn't, HB Civil is a firm out of Staten, Oregon, so they're a little closer to the project physically than the other two contractors, but some of this is a bit of a synthetic effort to get more money up front on some bids.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that. I just wanted to make sure that we weren't unintentionally, supporting a company that doesn't pay their workers as much, but it doesn't sound like that's good.
Yeah, they're bound by a number of contract rules to pay prevailing wage rates, and so they're all three bidders are held to that same standard. I think what we're seeing is more of just an allocation on project components. So,
Councillor Lowe.
So just back to the anti-graffiti coatings, is that something that if we chose not to apply it now, sometime down the road, we could add that? If we find that we do have issues, that we could just add it later on. It's probably some cost more than this.
You can certainly add it on later. I think, depending on the specifics of the graffiti event, as you can imagine, if someone were to saturate the surface with red paint, that's going to be a little challenging to remove, more so than, say, a more neutral color that would, blend in with the concrete better. So, if you've just got a casual rattle can, you could probably use some high pressure water, warm water with soap. The challenge is that, as we all know, concrete surfaces are quite porous, and someone really wants to leave their mark, and it's a color that's vivid, then you struggle a little bit to make it blend away. So.
Go ahead.
And so follow up. So if you just say you just put the primer on, spend the 30,000 for the primer, does that give you additional coverage or protection rather against somebody tagging it?
It would be an incremental protection. I think, it would also, that base level would give you some protection against just kind of a weathering look. I would say that, if we just did the base coat, we'd probably want to either make a decision on the overcoat within maybe 30 days or 60 days, just so that you get a good adhesion between the two. The anti-graffiti coating is kind of a interesting product, and it doesn't want to really stick a whole lot to anything, which is the point. Nothing will, it'll bind with the primer, but there's a window that you'd like to apply it, reasonable window to coat it.
Kevin, if I could ask you a related question. One of the questions I sent in had to do with the fencing around the reservoir. How high is that fencing, and is it part of this work, or is that something else done by the city?
Be a 6-foot fence with 3 rows of barbed wire on top. It would be one of the final stages of the whole project, just because fences tend to get damaged during construction, and they have the pump station to build next to the reservoir. So the idea is get everything done and put the fence up at the end. I believe, right, Pete?
That's correct.
Correct.
There would probably be varying degrees of temporary fencing from the contractor's effort. That typically temporary fencing doesn't have the barbed wire top on it, and but that's correct, Kevin.
Well, can you explain to me, if you have a 28-foot high reservoir, why you only have a 6-foot high fence?
It's just a standard perimeter chain link fence that we would be putting up, like you'd see around most facilities. I mean, we have other deterrents. Are you worried about someone climbing the reservoir, or?
No, I was just I would have expected it to be higher. I don't know why.
Yeah, we can certainly make it higher. Yeah, there's no, as to how the fence looks in terms of its height and the degree to which you top it with barbed wire or not. That's kind of an aesthetic valuation that, right now, the way it stands is we just have a standard galvanized chain link fence, pretty conventional, with a 3-strand barbed wire on top.
Well, I've been discussing some ideas that were brought to me by a young man at the farmer's market that deal with making chain link fences more attractive, which could in fact make the fence opaque rather than something you could see right through, which would seem to me to be a deterrent to graffiti artists. I mean, no one can see your graffiti. I wouldn't be motivated to paint something that I'm not a graffiti artist. But anyway, it's something I would like to discuss it with the Public Arts Committee, see what their thoughts are. We'd probably ultimately take it to the farmers market for public input. But I guess I would ask Mr. Fear if you think that an opaque fence would deter graffiti.
I think, yeah, certainly depending on the structure that you're trying to conceal. We use opaque fences quite a bit for lower height structures. If you were standing on 9th Street, let's say, looking across the existing ditch to the east of 9th when this project is complete, you'd have to have this is a tall structure, it's 28 feet tall, so you're going to see it clear well above any kind of level of fencing. So I think, would you be able to obscure a portion of the project with a solid fence? Certainly. Would you be obscuring the part that the graffiti folks are most interested in tagging? Potentially not, right? Just because it's a tall structure.
Okay, thank you. That's very helpful.
Yeah.
Councilor Bisco.
Yes, can we just clarify, Mr. Blumenthal or Mr. Workman, if the fence it's not listed in here, is that part of this bid price?
It's I can clarify that it's not part of this project. We've designed it and it will be part of a future bid, phase 2. Yeah.
And do you have then an estimate of the cost of that fence?
I do not at this point.
Yes, go ahead, Finance.
Before I go into my pitch, since council got all their questions answered, because I'm going to talk about the finances of this project.
I believe Councilor Andrade had her hand up. Do you have another question?
I was just gonna say to your point, that potentially we could look into having the reservoir itself become an art project as opposed to just the fence. That was it.
Okay.
Go ahead, Mike.
This project, this $4.1 million is part of it's supposed to be a $16 million project, but right now we've got it budgeted around 15 million. So Chris told me you've been looking at this part of the project at 3.1. So right now I have enough money to cover this in the budget, and by the end of the year, the 4.1 or no 3.1. So we're a little short. We administratively we're okay because we've got that other 9 million budgetary. We're good. We're gonna have to look at next year when we start our capital projects. It's gonna be in about a month and a half, if you can believe that. So that's something we're gonna have to look at. Probably by that time we may have Pete, when is the next phase going out for bid?
Yeah, we're hoping to have that done probably mid-spring of this coming year. We'd like to really take advantage of the in-water work period for the summer, late summer, to get the new parts of it. We're pushing pretty hard on finishing the design. So
Okay, so that's going to push it over into next fiscal year. Okay.
Yeah.
So there's another piece of the puzzle. I've been waiting for this part to do a utility rate study. If we don't have enough money for this project, we're going to have to look at either borrowing it from Business Oregon, or the other thing is shift some other project money, or possibly raise water rates. That's about the only three options we have. So I just wanted to put that out to council so you're aware. This is what I've got coming up. I have to deal with. The utility rate study is something that everybody wanted to see tiered rates, and low income. We need to review all that. They'll do a really deep analysis. I mean, Chris told me Joan did comparisons. I mean, the utility rate study will do some comparisons. However, they will go into cost of goods, and they'll really go into good detail. We have a budget right now of $25,000 set aside for that. But I really can't go unless we get the numbers for the next project, but we're not going to get that, sounds like, until maybe May. So we're pushing that again out into the next year. So just wanted y'all to realize we've got some other budgetary things to look at that's going to flow to next year. So that's all. I just wanted to bring that up.
No, I appreciate that. If you could refresh my memory of what time of year would we be setting utility rates?
We would do that every July. That's how it's been set up. You did a January one when you did the adjustment before. We can do a January or July. It doesn't matter. We can do a December. I mean, I've done that over in Newport. We did it when it was time just to do it. So does that answer your question, Counselor?
Yes. Councilor Lowe.
Okay, so there's a second bid that's going to go out. What is that going to entail? I guess I was under the impression that this particular bid what we're dealing with now is the reservoir, the entire part of the reservoir. And then the next bid would be the water treatment plant itself. But so can you?
The way, Counselor, I have these built together as one project. That's how it's always been built. And I never changed it. So now we're starting to getting finalized so we can see what the numbers are.
Okay. Well, I guess what I'm coming, I mean, I heard that the fencing would be part of another bid. So what else with the reservoir might be part of the bid?
And I was surprised about the fence tonight. So I'm going, okay, there's another bid that we have, another part we have to watch out for.
Well, I think Peter can address that. It'll be included in that second. But Peter, can you kind of high point? What are the kind of top 3 or 4 items that are being included in that last?
The part 2, it'll be only a second part, which will be the bulk of the water treatment plant building itself. It'll be the water treatment plant building, a new river intake screen and pump station, and it'll be will be a high service pump station to deliver water from this new reservoir that we're talking about today up into town. So kind of 3 large components of that second phase: the treatment plant, all the treatment equipment in it, the new river intake, and a high service pump station to push it into the grid. And just as a quick sub note, the reason the high service pump station has been packaged with all that is because it's sort of like work. In other words, you have a contractor that's capable of doing more mechanical and electrical work. This reservoir is really a standalone concrete tank structure and can be done by a wider group of people.
Councilor.
So I'd like to go back to that fence also. I'm curious that once we build this reservoir, we don't have the fence part secured. We don't know what the dollars are. We've got access ladders and access hatches and things of that nature. So from a safety standpoint, if we have a water treatment reservoir, we have the reservoir, excuse me, and it's not secured from either vandalism or just access, we'll just call it access. I'm curious why the fence wasn't included in this piece. It seems like it's an important piece.
Sure, I can speak to that. So in terms of access, that's a real different issue than the vandalism piece. There's a single ladder on the exterior of the tank leading to the top, and it has a 9-foot tall steel door that bolts over and secures access. So it's not a climbable type structure unless you have a key to open that panel and gain access to the ladder. So we've kind of bifurcated, I guess it's not what I would call by any stretch a climbing hazard. It's restricted to accessible routes, but the graffiti part is a separate issue. It's just a wider part of the site that it's a different need, I guess.
Might you speak then to the reason for having a fence then, if it's not for security and won't serve the purpose of deterring graffiti, it sounds like?
We've done a lot of these facilities. Some have fences, some clients want a more open approach and they don't want a fence at all. And so we've done, a large number of types, and then you get into the design of the fence, what style. We've typically deferred that a little bit to user preferences. So
Thank you.
sure.
Counselor Nielsen.
Chris, in regards to financial concerns with going over budget on this as bids start to come in for next phases, is it possible still for us to find additional grants and funding rather than the utility rate increase? They're still available to us possibly?
There are us and everybody else whose projects are going over budget, right? So we don't, this is nationwide. It's not limited just Philomath, not just limited to Oregon. So, any of these public work projects that have been in the pipeline are seeing these increased costs, both on the labor and on the materials side. So there are funds available still. We'll continue to pursue those. There's financing available through Business Oregon. So, we're not going to get to a point where, we're $300,000 short. We don't have it in our fund. What we're really talking about is the city is going to have the cash to do the project. It's just that's cash that comes away from other projects, or you find money to backfill these overages, either through additional grants or additional loans, which you can then finance and extend out over a longer period of time, which allows you to pay that back over more time, which means less hurt today, and you give yourself a little bit more breathing room for a few years down the road. So we don't know what those options are going to be. For this project, I grateful for Peter and his assessment that, we're not that far off in the overage from what they anticipated. The 3.1 million that we kind of originally talked about, that's going back 5-6 years ago. And we kind of started through this project. That $3 million number was where we were ballparking it. So really to go up $1 million over the last 5 years seems a little bit more perspective. That number didn't jump that far in 6 months or a year. So I think our engineers have been giving us good information all along. The numbers are where they need to be. I think the bigger question to me is the project needed, right? Or is it something we can defer till later? If it's something we can defer till later, then that's a consideration. But then that leads to the second question is it reasonable to think that the cost is going to be less at some point in the future? And on both of those, I would say, we need the project now. I don't know that this is something we can defer till later. And I don't know that I could say in the next 2 to 3 years, this is going to be less expensive to build. So then you dig in your heels and you find the money and you go ahead and get this project done, knowing that, again, as we develop our capital improvement plan, looking forward for the next 3 to 5 years, we're going to be looking at what other projects are there, completion of this overall project. Budgetarily, it's one project. The reality is it's going out for 2 separate bids. So we'll look at that overall budget we have for the entire project. If we need to increase that, then we'll find other places where we can pull that money in, and that money is going to come in either from grants, additional financing, other projects that we postpone or delay, or it'll be increased revenue, which comes from increased utility rates. So, we're not needing to decide any of those things today. What Mike was just leading to is those are conversations that the council and the committees are going to have when we get into the first part of next year. But I don't think it changes the decision tonight, which is this a good bid? Contractor and our engineer feels comfortable with it. Our public works director feels comfortable with it. Finance director has got a comfort level that the funding's there. And do we proceed with awarding this contract? That's really the question for tonight, knowing that there's a lot of questions that we're not going to have the answers to that we'll have to grapple with next year.
Kevin, clarifying question. I believe there's also landscaping around the reservoir. Is that part of that second bid as well?
Pete, I don't know if was that part included in this part?
We've been fairly, there's no landscaping included in this project. So we can certainly, add that in. It's not too late by any stretch. I think the key there mostly with landscaping is we'd like to, get some direction as to the level and the type of landscaping that you're looking for. Right now, the soil slopes around the reservoir will be reseeded. And so you'll have a mobile type surface similar to what you see in the field right now. But if you're looking for some additional screening elements, trees and whatnot, then we'd be happy to, put that in. Those can be added really at any point.
Okay.
It's kind of my understanding, the reason that we went out and collected all the camas seed and bulbs and everything else was what we were reseeding it on that slope.
Yeah.
That was basically the landscaping besides other trees that the city itself was going to add at a later date.
Other questions? Councilor Lowe.
So once a bid is approved by us, how soon would construction start?
Yeah, so pretty much following the OER guidelines, we have a 7-day protest period that commences running upon your authority tonight, your intent to award. And then we could probably expect, so construction is going to start in a sort of administrative phase, almost just where I start getting information from the contractor about different components that basically the submittal review phase. Does the pipe and some components that they're putting in meet the spec? And I quickly review that. So to answer your question, I would say you could probably start seeing some early work in maybe 40 days, maybe 45, and then it'll ramp up quite quickly after that. Certainly some early work. I think the early work is going to be the bridge, getting the access bridge across, and a couple of the pipeline crossings bored underneath the ditch. And it'll be clearly active through a big part of the summer. That's when you'll see your peak of activity.
Thank you.
Other questions? Councilor Lowe.
And just a clarification question. Not too long ago, didn't we give the approval to get some pipe? We contracted for pipe to be brought in. Was that outside of this bid, or is that included within this bid? Or
so that's kind of outside of and in parallel with this.
Yeah.
So there's that has been a huge help because a lot of the contractors are quite concerned about. Chris, you mentioned this nationwide challenge to market conditions. It's severely affected a lot of projects. Just being unable to get materials in a timely fashion. So we have all the pipe and valves and some long lead items, and it's been a huge help.
Yes, ma'am.
I move that the city council approve option 3 and award the contract for the reservoir to HP Civil Incorporated for $4,221,000.
I'll second that.
Discussion of the motion. We've already had a number of questions. Are there any additional questions? Councilor.
I'm questioning spending the extra $60,000 on the anti-graffiti stuff. At this point, since we're seem to be worrying about the budget, it seems like if we could cut 60,000 off here, that might be able to be spent on something else down the road that will need more so than I think than the anti-graffiti paint and primer.
Is that an amendment to the motion?
Nope, it's just my opinion.
Okay. Councilor Andrade.
I am also hesitant about that for the same reason. And then also, if we're going to make an art project out of this, then perhaps we should wait until we have art on the reservoir.
I would agree. So
You amend it?
you may amend it.
Can I ask a question of the
Yes.
engineer first, maybe? Because I haven't talked to Pete on this. And Kevin may have the answer to this too. So either the gentleman. I think this question was asked, but I don't know that I heard a direct answer. If we don't do this now, is there any reason why we couldn't contract this ourselves? Because I'm assuming that the contractor who's doing this work is going to hire a third party to come in and do the coding. Is there a reason why the city couldn't do that direct bid here a year from now? If we decided that it wasn't becoming our project, we were still going to put the fence, if nothing materializes with doing something other than what's already planned, is there a reason the city couldn't do a direct bid for that paint work a year from now?
Yeah, I'll speak to that. I think you certainly can. I mean, yeah, it could be, generally what will happen is we would pressure wash the entire exterior of the structure. Like you said, Chris, it would be a third party. So yeah, you could defer that entirely and, incorporate whatever artwork you have or other elements, and it doesn't have to be now. So.
Hey, Pete, I have a question, if I may, with Pete on this that might know better, but I was kind of shocked with the cost that came in. Because about 10 years ago, we got not a official, 3-bid quote, but priced out having the other reservoir up on Nebeck painted, and it was like $170,000. Is painting that much more than applying this at this time, or
Sure.
what do you think we'd be paying if we did this a year later on our own?
Yeah, typically, unlike a steel structure, which requires a coating system for corrosion protection, concrete is a really durable system without a coating, and we typically don't advise or don't recommend a coating just because it's naturally durable. The wrinkle becomes a purely aesthetic one almost. It would be nice if you didn't have anyone desiring to paint their initials on something. If you elected, as you were saying, Kevin, to use a coating system, let's say you didn't want a gray color, you wanted a green color or a gray color or a tan color or some other motif, it's just a coating system that eventually ages and requires maintenance. So there isn't a right answer to this. This is a difficult thing. I mean, the solution would be just to not have people paint it. So anyway, that's my two. Did I answer your question, Kevin?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
My last 2 cents on that, I guess, before the motion would be, does it change how the council feels about this because of the location of this reservoir? I mean, if it was out on Main Street where everybody was driving by it and seeing it every day, as opposed to being back in Marys River Park on the edge of 9th Street across from an industrial area, Does it change how we feel about if it gets tagged? Are we going to be okay if that tag stays there for a month or two before we have extra time to go out and take care of it? Or is it going to be something where we're going to be spending the money every time it gets tagged? We're going to be Johnny on the spot out there taking care of this all the time, because there's different costs associated with that. I mean, we're just going to, if we're going to go in and remove graffiti once a year, that's a different cost than if we're going to be out there every month taking care of it. And the visibility of it, to me, just brings a little bit of question, I guess. So just food for thought.
Councilor Briscoe.
I'd like to call the question, amended or otherwise. I'm not sure what the step is from this point.
Call the question, then you would not have the opportunity to amend it. So you might see, the chair might see if anyone wants to make an amendment, and if not, then probably appropriate to call the
Withdraw
question.
that.
Yes.
We're going to move that direction.
Does anyone wish to make a comment? Councilor Lowe.
Yeah, I'd like to make an amendment to award the contract as HP Civil Inc. Without either alternative A1 or A2. Therefore, the base price being $4,161,000.
Second.
All right, motion by Council, amendment by Councilor Lowe, second by Councilor Bowman. Shall we vote on the amendment first? All in favor of awarding the contract as described under option 1? Okay, motion passes unanimously. So is there now a need to vote? I guess there is a need to vote on
You
it.
just amended by substitution, basically, and that's great.
Okay. All in favor of the motion to award the contract to HP Civil as described under option 3?
Option
One.
I'm sorry.
As amended.
So, right, option 1.
Yes. Option 1. Okay. I'm not sure.
I saw 6 hands.
And then yours went up late. So is that 7?
Hers was the 6th.
The hers wasn't.
7 is here.
That's right.
Okay. So we will award the contract without the additional coatings to HP Civil. Thank you both for your input.
Thank you.
The next item on our agenda is ordinances and resolutions, ordinance number 870. Which of you will be speaking for this, I guess?
I can read it, and then then it would be on the table, and if you have questions, we can answer it then.
Okay.
And I will tell you that even the title has been outdated a little bit by the election. So this is ordinance number 873, an ordinance of the city of Philomath declaring a 2-year moratorium on psilocybin product manufacturing, psilocybin service centers, establishing a sunset date, and referring the ordinance to the voters. That's on the table, but of course it's been referred to the voters, and I believe the city recorder has unofficial election results that it was passed by 51% and change.
The yes votes for this measure were 51.95% of the ballots cast, or a total of 1,370 votes. The no votes were 48.05% for a total of 1,267 votes. So there are 103 votes more for the yes. That is unofficial until I get the certified results, but with only challenged ballots left to be counted, it's reasonable to expect that to stand.
And so what you would be voting on tonight is really the substance of this, which is section 1. It has been amended slightly so that the sunset that used to be section 4 is also included in that, and that's what would appear in the municipal code.
Questions, Councilor Lehman?
Yeah, I see under the purpose, and this is a question for council. Under the purpose, I see A, B, C, D, E, F, and G. And I'm just wondering how those were derived, because it seems to me all of our conversations about this primarily focused on G. And we didn't really talk about preventing psilocybin from going from this state to another state, that kind of stuff. And I'm just wondering where that language came from.
The language came from.
So I can speak to that. It came mostly from the marijuana ordinances. It was an attempt to mirror what was already in existence based on the fact that they were kind of being the same, but almost more strict, the psilocybin in almost a stricter capacity.
Its origin is a memorandum written by the U.S. Attorney for Oregon on how the federal government would look at legalization of recreational marijuana when it is not legal under the federal system. These were the factors that they said the federal government would be interested in.
Can I get that from a state level, I guess, for the Paloma Municipal Code? Do we need to?
That is what was included in the measure that was put before the voters. So voters have approved this.
I'm dubious about that. I don't remember, of course.
Well,
anyway, all right, I believe you.
We can put up the July 25 packet if you would like. And what I would say is there is a difference between the ballot title, which is just the haiku that we do to try to get a measure placed in front of the voters, and the measure itself, which was in this form.
Councilor Briscoe.
Yes, my question is, does this ordinance preclude us from, say, adding H, I, or J to such a discussion?
I think that you would want to do it in steps, because what we have is something that the voters approved at the last election. To honor that, I think you codify that. And of course, it's an ordinance, it's not an amendment to the charter, and so the city council could amend that, but I think it would take a second ordinance to do it. I don't have one for you, but if that's something the council wanted to do, you wanted to add something, or frankly, you wanted to amend this in some other way, we can do that. It just requires a second ordinance.
Just a point of clarification, in the case that, say, we wanted to amend something, that would require a normal public hearing process as well, right?
And notice and publication. Yeah.
I'm under. Go ahead, Councilor.
Yeah, I'm really glad you brought that question up, Councilor Lehman, because I had very much the same thoughts about it.
I will say that Councilor Causey also had questions about that and called me today about it. So unfortunately, I'm prepared.
Does this mean that none of us actually read what we voted on?
I would not speak to that.
So anyway, so where I'm coming from, I appreciate how you clarified and explained it. And I really, I think it's kind of a done deal at this point, but I do want to go on record objecting to some of the purposes that are here. Specifically B, prevent revenue from the sale of psilocybin going to criminal enterprises, gangs, and cartels. As I understand it, this would be regulated in such a manner that, if anything, this would reduce that possibility by having this regulated. Right now, any sort of drug that's a Schedule 1 under the federal code that's illegal, we all know that criminal gangs are using that to the fullest. So this creating a legal product doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to increase the criminal activity. So that's my opinion on that. Number C, letter C, prevent the diversion of psilocybin from this state to the other states. I doubt very much that Philomath is going to have any impact on doing that on it, if it's legal. It's probably being used right now. Fentanyl's being used right now, I'm sure, in this town, but, again, it's considered illegal, but here we have something that's being offered as a possible therapeutic benefit, but we're focusing on the negative aspects of it in terms of, but I get it, it's the law. The federal government sometimes is behind the curve in society. And then the last letter that I object to, I guess, is E, preventing violence and the use of firearms in the cultivation and distribution of psilocybin. Again, I don't see that being relevant to Lowell in our situation.
If I could ask council for some clarification, because in preparation for this meeting, the first thing I did was go and look in the voters pamphlet, which includes the ballot title, which I expect most of us did read. And this information, as it appears in the ordinance, was included in our July 25th conference. Obviously, sorry, not a memorable item, but it was there in all of the detail that you're seeing here. So my question for you is, could you clarify, if I'm a voter, how do I get from the ballot title to this?
In order to have a measure put on the ballot, you need to have the full piece of legislation. And so what you would do is you said, well, I see the ballot title, I would like to see the full measure. You'd simply call the city recorder, or you go online, like what I did today was go online and pull a packet that this was discussed. But I can see someone saying, well, I don't know what meeting this was discussed. Call the city recorder and say, what is the actual text of the measure? And you would get this ordinance.
Okay.
And it's the same process on the state level. So if you actually looked at measure 109, that was the statewide yes or no for psilocybin. The actual measure 109 is, I believe, over 100 pages long.
Right. So I would have to reach out to the Secretary of State to get the full measure, or would it be posted somewhere?
Some websites have like Ballotpedia, which is, it's not a government affiliated type website, but it will pick up that kind of information to distribute it to the public. So whether or not it's the actual governmental entity that's doing it, or it's getting picked up by a third party and then distributed, it would be available from the Secretary of State, but how that would be available would depend on how the Secretary of State is available.
Okay, thank you very much. As you stated, this was put before the voters, and I believe that we should approve the ordinance as it was put before the voters. Councilor Bismarck.
I don't have any objection with that approval based on this clarification, but I wonder if it would be helpful, or if there's any way to note in here, a brief text in here stating that this language is from, did you say the state attorney general of Oregon, whatever the person, wherever that source
It's
was,
the U.S. attorney.
right? Could we source that so that it's understood that this language wasn't manifested by this council?
It was for marijuana and not for.
Okay, so that probably wouldn't do. Okay. Just looking for a way to alleviate the questions that are happening in this space already. I don't know.
So we'll have at least some, it'll be captured in the minutes for this meeting, so.
So we should do a roll call vote.
I'm sorry, yes.
Just ask Mr. Bird, do we need to update the title,
No,
or is
that's
it
just
fine
the
just as it
title.
is? Okay.
So the title will be fine. And it really, again, what the council is voting on is codifying it, so it'll go into the municipal code.
My recommendation to the council would be that, just a cautionary tale, I guess, when something goes out to the voters and the voters approve it, and it comes back to the council to essentially codify it, then codify it. And then if there's additional issues with it, we need to massage it more. That should be done after the fact, and even then should be done cautiously because it's gone out to the voters and they've approved it, right? So, I take.
It's an ordinance now.
Right.
Because the voters have approved it, they have enacted it.
So tonight is a little semantic in that we're codifying it, so our approving so it can be codified to show the reflection of the vote of the citizens. I take part in the conversation that's been had on the purpose for it and the definition. At the end of the day, we're looking at the prohibition that's put in place, and a lot of the reasoning and the conversation that this body's had about the reasoning for it had all to do with not having all the rules and procedures, not knowing what the administrative regulations were going to be, and then all of these details, which we're seeing even creep up tonight. And so, at the end of the day, I think that having a couple of years to work with the state and have the state, see what regulations are put in place to prevent some things. I do want to defend our city council or our city attorneys a little bit, and that they didn't have anything to go off of either. And so what's most recent, most similar? Well, the marijuana was kind of close, not an exact fit, but let's use the language from there to have something to put in front of the voters, right? So I do think we're dealing with things that just haven't, we're ahead of the curve a little bit. The state's getting ahead of the curve a little bit. That was the whole point of the moratorium.
I'd say we had, the council considered two different ordinances and a third action in that meeting. The third action would have been to take no action. But you had a prohibition and a moratorium. Put a moratorium before the voters, and the voters approved it.
Councillor Lowe.
And I appreciate all of that, and maybe I'm sort of a different wavelength or something. And I appreciate what you said, Chris, but I take a little bit of what you said as somewhat of an admonishment, which I disagree with. I think it's perfectly okay for us to be able to voice our opinions here as to how we perceive this. And I understand you can't do anything, change it, whatever, but I hope you're not suggesting that, I don't want to take it that way, that, oh, this is all set, attorneys have worked on it, so just council go ahead and just accept it. I think it's perfectly okay for us to say what we said. I'm glad it's part of the record.
Yeah, and capture in the record is the best way to do that. So capture on the record tonight, anybody can go back and reference that is exactly the place to do it. Okay, so.
Thank you. Do we need a motion to approve this?
No, once we just go directly to the roll.
Okay, thank you. City recorder?
Catherine Bisco,
Yes.
Ruth Coffey,
Yes.
Matt Lehman,
Yes.
David Lowe,
Yes.
Teresa Nielsen,
Yes.
Jessica Andrade.
Yes.
Okay, very good. Thank you. And thank you for your. Okay.
Thanks for the heads up.
Okay. The next item on our agenda is reports of boards, commissions, committees, council liaisons, and staff. And our first item is the mayor and city council election status report. I believe that
I don't really have anything to add. I just wanted to put that in there because I knew that some people were wondering.
Some people still are. Right?
I anticipate we'll have an update on Wednesday. I fully anticipate it's going to go automatically to a hand recount. That's going to happen on Monday. Yeah, interestingly enough, I am talking to the county clerk. The hand recount isn't. I don't want to minimize it. It's not that it's not that big of a deal. The bigger deal is pulling the 2,000 and some Philomath ballots out of the 45,000 that were cast in Benton County. That's the bigger deal. And they've been working on that, I assure you. That has been their task at hand. So
I wonder, city recorder, I realize I'm putting you on the spot, but in the event that we should have any two councilors whose votes were tied.
there is a process. It's identified in our ordinance,
And we've done that before.
the choosing of lots. But I mostly wanted to clarify in the memorandum that when it comes down to if there are two counselors for the final seat that are within 5 votes, those are the only ballots that are going to be recounted. They are not going to recount everybody's count. They're only going to recount for those 2 candidates.
we have any other questions on this issue? Okay, do we have anyone else who wanted to report under this?
I think I'd be remiss if I went the whole evening without saying go Beavs.
That's right.
That's it.
Can I admonish him in a council meeting?
I would like to mention that Councilman and Councilman Wilson and myself and other volunteers distributed information packets for the upcoming Streetscapes project, which Chelsea did an outstanding job of putting together and organizing and making sure we knew where to go and who to talk to. And perhaps, Teresa and Matt, perhaps you could comment, but I found that people were uniformly excited about it, about the project. Very grateful for the information. And couldn't wait to get the streets fixed. In fact, one of the people I spoke to said, you know, the only thing I really don't like about Florida is the roads. Sorry, Kevin, if you're still listening. Demeter, do you have a comment?
Yeah, everybody was pretty happy. A couple of the more industrial, I got the more industrial section were indifferent would be the word that I would use. Like, oh, okay, thanks. But then there were some people that wanted to just chat with you for like 20 minutes about what happened in 1972 and why this is. There were some questions that were raised about delivery trucks and things like that, about with the, you know, the bulb outs and changing the widths of the road and how that was going to impact them. And I assured everyone that we had their best interests at heart, but I don't know.
So do you have anything?
Well, I dealt mostly with a more of a retail portion of Philomath, and they were very impressed by the package, Chelsea. They just really loved that the information was clear, it was concise, it was easy to read and easy to access, and that it was attractively presented, and so that was a positive thing. Most of them had major concerns about access to driveways for the customers and how it will affect their business. And that was the major concern. I got a chance to speak Spanish. Que bueno. So that was really fun. But yeah, really very positively accepted. And also they really appreciated that we made that personal connection. I had several, I mean, probably 4, 5, 6 people that said, thank you so much for, you know, as a city representative coming out and talking to us about this and presenting the information. So they were very, very welcoming and appreciative.
Well, we as city staff thank everyone. There were more than just in this room that helped, but we appreciate it. It would have been a lot for us to take on just ourselves. So we appreciate it. Thank you.
Now, did any of you encounter anyone who was totally unaware of the project?
Oh. Folks at Dollar General didn't even know. Wow. Like nothing. Like, oh, right here in front of our street.
In Philomath?
Wow.
I think it actually, I would leave this up to the following council, obviously, but it might be worthwhile following up with businesses early next year to see how they're holding up. Okay. The next item on our agenda, if there are no other additions, is executive session. To read the following mayor's statement regarding executive session. Columbus City Council will now meet in executive session for the purpose of consulting with legal counsel concerning current litigation or litigation likely to be filed. Executive session is held pursuant to ORS 192.660, which allows the council to meet in executive session to conduct this discussion. Representatives of the news media, designated staff, and other designated persons shall be allowed to attend the executive session. All other members of the audience are asked to leave the room. Representatives of the news media are specifically directed not to report on any of the deliberations during the executive session, except to state the general subject of the session as previously announced. No final decision may be made in executive session. At the end of the executive session, we will return to open session and welcome any waiting audience back into the room. I would remind the council members and staff that the confidences in this executive session belong to the city council as a body and not to the individual members. These confidences should only be disclosed if the city council as a body approves such a disclosure. If a member or staff person does not believe that he or she can maintain these confidences, then I would invite that member or staff person not to participate in the executive session. All right.
Take a moment to
Stop the recording.
do the